Good morning. My name is Brianna Eider. My colleague John Ricca and I work for the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, specifically the Niosh mining program. Our mission is the health and safety of the United States mine worker. I'm going to present a talk entitled Improve Workplace Examinations Using Niosh's Examiner Hazard Recognition Tool. This presentation encompasses the hazard recognition research that we've conducted over the past few years to better understand mine worker hazard recognition ability and in support of the development of the Examiner Hazard Recognition software tool. During this presentation, we're going to discuss the Niosh Examiner software. We'll briefly discuss the research that informed its development. John's going to demonstrate some of the key features of the software, and then we're going to wrap up by discussing some ways that you can incorporate Examiner into your current health and safety plan. Mine workers must be able to recognize hazards in their work environment. This is a critical skill, and it poses a challenge to mine workers because their work environment changes regularly. It can be highly risky, and it includes many pieces of moving equipment and operating machinery. To better understand mine worker hazard recognition, Niosh conducted a laboratory research study. We were specifically interested in identifying differences in hazard recognition for mine workers of varying levels of experience. For this study, we invited safety professionals, experienced mine workers, less experienced mine workers, and mining engineering students to our virtual immersion simulation laboratory, or the Viz Lab. The Viz Lab includes several virtual reality spaces. Our study took place primarily in Space A, which is a 360-degree theater with 10-foot high screens. In Space B, which is a classroom-like space with a large curved screen. During the first part of the study, participants were outfitted in eye tracking equipment, motion capture markers, and they were given a handheld button to press. The goal of this equipment was to keep track of where the participants' eyes and bodies were as they searched for hazards in our scenes, and then to capture when a hazard was identified. And we were able to do this with that button. So when the participant found something, they pressed the button, and that indicated that they had identified a hazard. After completing this task, participants moved to Space B for a debrief, where we discussed the hazards that were identified, as well as those that were missed, because we wanted to gain a better understanding of what our participants' experiences were with those hazards. We were also able to, at this point in time, collect risk assessments for all of the hazards. Since completing this laboratory research study, we've analyzed the data, published several research papers that discuss mine workers' hazard recognition. In general, we've identified several barriers that mine workers encounter when recognizing hazards. These barriers can be grouped into three categories: experience, complexity, and change. So our results show that worker experience, in this case, tenure within the mining industry, affects hazard recognition. Specifically, workers with more experience identify a greater number of hazards than those with less experience. A caveat to this finding, though, is that workers' knowledge, which is really driven by hazard and risk specific training, significantly influences the number of hazards that are identified. So safety professionals with more experience and hazard-specific training recognize significantly more hazards than mining engineering students with the least experience in hazard-specific training. Complexity of the work environment also affects hazard recognition. Mine workers identify fewer hazards in cluttered environments, such as the shop. In areas where more than one hazard is present, workers are more likely to miss hazards, meaning they do not identify all hazards in that area. One possible explanation for this finding is that when workers find a hazard, their search is satisfied, and they move on to search a different location, leaving those other hazards that were not identified behind. Finally, we found that change to the work environment or even to the mine worker affects hazard recognition. Those changes include updates to mine plans, introductions of new tools, equipment or machinery, as well as Mine Worker Fitness for Duty. To address these barriers, Niosh developed Examiner. Examiner can be accessed by visiting the Niosh mining website. I'm including a link to that cover page on this slide. The cover page includes a brief description of the software, the features that are included in the software, as well as instructions for how to download and then run Examiner on your computer. If you are familiar with the software and you're familiar with the journey that it's taken over the past couple of years, you'll note that the version of software that's currently available on the webpage is the final version. So if you downloaded last year, you likely have the beta version. The final version that's available now has a couple of updated and new features. So I would encourage you to go and re-download the software so that you have the best version available. And that's the version that we're going to talk about as we demonstrate the software in just a few moments. So before we jump in and work with the software, I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the features that are included and the competencies and training strategies that we've incorporated, as well as the materials we've included for you to use. So Examiner is software that you can download onto your personal computer. Once downloaded, it doesn't require internet access to run. So you can take this out into the field with you if you have spotty internet out there. No worries, this doesn't require internet to run. At the outset, we chose to design Examiner to be used by health and safety professionals and trainers during Part 46 new miner or annual refresher training. Examiner was designed to be used during instructor-led classes in a classroom setting and projected onto a screen. Examiner gives health and safety professionals and trainers the ability to create custom hazard recognition materials, either by using the panoramic scenes that Niosh created or with images from your own sites. Our goal is to give you the ability to quickly and easily create site-specific hazard recognition materials. Hazard recognition is a cognitively complex task that encompasses many competencies. To improve hazard recognition, it's important to address as many competencies as possible. We identified 4 critical competencies to address within the Examiner software. These include general and site-specific hazard knowledge, visual search, and pattern recognition and matching. We focused on these competencies because they're necessary. Mine workers have to have knowledge and understanding of hazards to be able to recognize them. And we're able to incorporate these competencies into the software program because it's visual in nature. And because of that, we were able to focus on visual search and pattern matching and recognition because they're both visual processes. To improve upon these competencies, we incorporated scientifically based training strategies. And these are based on information, demonstration, practice, and feedback. As we demonstrate the Examiner software, which John's going to do in just a few minutes, we're going to point out how each of these training strategies are incorporated. Examiner was designed with research to practice in mind. We adapted the methods and materials used in our hazard recognition laboratory research study to create it. So as a consequence, the materials that we developed for the laboratory study are included for your use. These materials include 31 panoramic scenes. These scenes are 4 locations at a surface limestone mine, and they include the pit, plant, shop, and along various roads and hallways. Across these panoramic scenes, we include 106 hazards. These hazards vary in type. Some of them are related to slip, trip, falls. Some of them are related to electricity and electrical hazards. There are ground control hazards, as well as hazards related to missing or incorrectly used PPE, among others. They vary in the risk that's associated. Some of them are highly risky. Some of them are less risky. in placement in the scene, in size. Some of them are very big, some are very small, as well as in salience. So when you look at some of these pictures, the hazard's going to pop right out at you, and other hazards may take a little bit of time or effort to find. Examiner also includes the workplace examination search task, where trainees are given the opportunity to practice searching through panoramic scenes for hazards. It also gives health and safety professionals the opportunity to provide workers with feedback for their performance during the search task. And this is included in the debrief. We'll talk about all of these in just a few moments. And finally, examiner gives health and safety professionals the opportunity to create their own custom materials. Another really great feature for examiner is the ample guidance documentation that's included to help facilitate use. So this guidance documentation includes a help guide with users' instructions and descriptions of the software's functionality. With this help guide, we also include a quick start guide that walks you through the basic steps for how to build scenarios, perform the workplace examination search task, and then debrief a training scene. That guide is included in the download folder as a PDF, as well as in the software. And you can access that through the For the Instructor menu. And as John starts his demonstration of the software in just a moment, he's really going to follow the quick start guide. So if you have that handy as you're watching this, it's a really great opportunity to kind of visualize what's going on that guide. We also include some tips for the instructor. These tips were mainly derived from observations we've made while watching mine safety and health professionals use Examiner in both their Part 46 and Part 48 classes. And then we also include appendices with all of the hazards, with all the hazard information that we include in the software. You can use these appendices as a guide when you build your own scenarios using Niosh scenes. So if you're planning a training class or another training opportunity, you can look to these appendices to help you build the scenarios that you'd like to use in your training classes. And then finally, we include 9 Niosh scenarios. And those scenarios are included so that if you're in a bit of a hurry, or if you aren't feeling confident just yet for building your own scenarios, you can use one of ours. They focus on specific topic areas, and you'll see those in the demonstration in just a moment. For right now, though, I'm going to pass control to John, and he's going to walk you through a demonstration of the key features of the software, starting with the workplace examination search task, and then the debrief, and then building scenarios and scenes with your own images. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brianna. Good morning or good afternoon, whichever the case may be for you. My name is John Ricca. I am part of the Examiner development team here at Niosh. And today I will be giving you a live demonstration of the software itself so that you have an idea of how to incorporate this into your training programs. So I'm going to share my screen here, and what you should be seeing is a screen that says Examiner. This is the main menu of the Examiner software program. It's laid out in a fairly simple and straightforward manner. We tried to make this as simple as possible when we were developing it, keeping as few buttons as possible on the screen. If you're familiar with Windows-based programs, you should have no problem at all learning how to use this software. It's really quite simple. But if you do get stuck at any point in time, we do provide a lot of help information that's included with the software, or you're always welcome to reach out to us at Niosh and send us an email and ask us a question about the software itself. At the end of the presentation, Brianna will be giving you some contact information that will should be able to let you know how to reach us. So I'm just going to jump in here and go over sort of the main functionality of the examiner software, which is performing the workplace examination search task. And then after we do the search task, the software will give us a little bit of feedback on how we did on our search task. It'll give us some performance metrics. It'll tell us what hazards were included in the scenes that we were searching, which ones we got correctly, and which ones we missed. So in order to set up a search task, what I'm going to do here is select the first button on the top of the menu called Select Scenario. So this will bring up the scenario menu, and what you will see at the top of it is Niosh scenarios. And what we mean by a scenario is simply just the sequence of scenes or images that you're going to see as you do your workplace examination search task. For example, you may begin searching an area in the shop area of the mine, and then you may go on to do a search area of the pit part of the mine. So that's what we mean by a scenario, just the different sequences of images you see as you're going through and doing your search task. So the scenarios that Niosh have developed, some of them are themed around certain types of hazards like electrical or ground control or handling material. So if you were interested in teaching a course that covered some of these hazards, you could select electrical, for example, and at that point you would instruct your trainees to search the images for electrical hazards. In addition to the Niosh scenarios, down below you have what are called my scenarios. These are scenarios that you create beforehand, so it requires a little bit of advanced preparation to create these, and I'll go over that a little bit later on in the presentation. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and select a scenario I created beforehand called the shop area. So I'll select that and say create session. Now from here, it's going to bring up a menu that will ask you to provide a name for the session. And usually we recommend that you give this a name that corresponds to, for example, the mine site that you're giving this instruction at. You may want to include the date, things like that. And the reason you can do that is so that you can go back and review the session if you wanted to again in the future. So I'm just going to name this one Calcima. I will say we have 25 participants here today. I'm going to go ahead and check instructor led, and then the software program also gives you the option of using a 5-minute timer that will be applied for each scene. And this timer is simply meant to get the class motivated and advance it. It's really not meant to provide any pressure on the people searching the scene, but rather just to get the class moving as you're going through the search task. Okay, so now we're all set up and we're ready to start our session. So the program is going to give you some basic instructions here. It says find as many hazards as possible around the work site, and you will see in this scenario we have 2 scenes. We have 2 scenes from the shop. So we're going to start shop 1 by clicking on the start button. And it'll bring up our first area that we can begin our workplace examination search task. So the software gives you the ability to pan around a full 360 degrees. So you can see all the way around. And you can pan around using either your mouse or the keyboard or the on-screen control buttons over here. If you see something that looks interesting, you could zoom in on it by using the mouse scroll wheel. You can zoom in and out, or you could use the on-screen buttons as well to zoom in and out. And as you're searching around the scene, if you happen to see a hazard, you can click on the screen and a little check mark, orange check mark will appear. So you can click around as many times as you want. If you decide that you clicked an error, you decide that, hey, maybe that's not really a hazard, you can click on it again and it will remove your check mark. So we can just pan around and look around here for some potential hazards. I see what looks like a tripping hazard here, so I'll click on that. I'll continue to search around a little bit more. This forklift operator does not look like he's wearing a seatbelt, so I'm going to click there. So I'm going to continue to search around a little bit more, see if I can find any more hazards. And yes, essentially, you're just trying to look for all the hazards in the scene. And Brianna and I have gone out and worked with trainers on incorporating this into the classroom. And what we have found is that it's really good to have people sort of gather around the screen and do this in groups, because it sort of ignites a discussion about, what may be a hazard and what's not. And it's kind of fun to break up the class into teams almost, so it's almost a little bit of a competition that way. So once you go through and you search for all your hazards, you click on the Done button at the bottom right hand of the screen, and this will take you back to the session scene. And from here, you have two different options. You have the option to go on to the next scene in the scenario, or you could debrief the scene that you just went over. I'm going to go ahead and select the next scene just to give you an idea of what that would look like. Again, you would just go around and search for your hazards and click on them. But in the interest of time for the demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and say done. And since that was the last scene in our scenario, the program is going to give us the debrief overview screen. So it's going to give us a little bit of basic metrics on how well we performed. So in our first scene, we found 3 of 8 hazards within that scene. We searched it for 2 minutes and 22 seconds, and we clicked 3 times. Likewise, in shop 6, we identified 2 of the 4 hazards. We only spent 17 seconds looking at it, and we did 2 clicks. The program gives you the ability to go into greater detail about debriefing. So you can click on shop 1, for example, and then click on debrief scene in the lower right-hand corner. And it'll give you an overview of which hazards you identified correctly and which ones you missed. The ones you identified correctly will be highlighted in a green color, and they will also appear up here in the left-hand corner with a green check mark. The ones that you missed will be outlined in red and will have a red X next to them. So you can see this is the first hazard we identified. This was a tripping hazard on the ground. You can click on this and the program will give you some additional information about tripping hazards. So in some cases, the program will give you the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR that's directly related to that, or it may give you some links to additional Niosh tools related to slips, trips, and falls. It also may give you some facts and figures about that particular hazard. So we can scroll around here. We can see that our second hazard that we found was the forklift operator not wearing a seatbelt. Again, the program gives you additional information about the hazard, links to additional information. And the idea is that you can go around and discuss these different hazards with your trainees and sort of learn about these hazards. So by now you may be wondering, well, what if I don't want to just search the shop? What if I wanted to create a scenario where I'm searching the pit area or the plant area of the mine? Well, I can show you how that would be done. So from here, I'm just going to go back to the debrief session. If we wanted to go ahead and debrief shop 6, we could do that as well. The program gives you, a lot of different options to go through and and debrief these different scenes. But if we wanted to make a new scenario where we're searching a different part of the mine, let's go ahead and go back to the main menu of the program. And the program will ask, are you sure you want to return to the main menu? Yes, we want to do that. But if you ever wanted to go back and debrief that scene again in the future, you could always go to debrief session, and our calcema session will be right there. And again, you can go back to that debrief scene. So don't worry about exiting out of that debrief because it will be saved, and you do have the ability to go back and debrief it again. Okay, so let's go ahead and build a new scenario with some of the Niosh scenes. To do this, we're going to go into the Instructors Resources menu. This menu gives you a lot of different options for the program, and it gives you some additional materials. Here you can find the Quick Start Guide and additional tips for the instructor on how to incorporate the software program into your training, classroom training. And there's some links to more Niosh mining resources. There's also a introductory module here that will give you an overview of the mine site that we used to create the images that are shown in the program. And over here, you have the options for scenes and scenarios. So we're going to click on Manage Scenarios. And we want to create a new scenario that includes images of the plant area and the pit area. So we'll name our new scenario Plant Pit. And here the software gives you options to choose from the 31 included Niosh images. So we can just pick a couple here. You can pick Plant 3, and we'll say Pit 5. And you can reorder these any which way you want to. So you can say you want to do the plant first, you can put that first, or if you want to do pit first, you can do that. And that's pretty much it. So you have the ability to add as many scenes as you would like to this. You could add an additional one. If you decide you don't like that one, you can always remove it. And as Brianna had mentioned, we include a lot of documentation with the software. So if you're not sure what's included in these scenes, you can always check the documentation, and it'll tell you how many hazards are in each scene, what types of hazards, and everything else you may want to know about these different scenes. So from that information, you can kind of build up the type of scenario that you would want to have for your particular training session. So I'm going to go ahead and save this scenario, and then I'll hit the quit button. And then I can go back to the main menu. And if I wanted to run a session using that new scenario, I would just go ahead and from the main menu, I would select scenario, and then I would select plant pit. So this is our newly created scenario. And then I would simply do the same process I did the first time around, giving the session a name, number of participants, checking whether or not it's an instructor-led session or not, and using a 5-minute timer. And then again, we would go ahead and do our search task using our new scenario, and we would go through in a similar process and just search through these scenes, clicking on any hazards we may find. So that gives you an idea of how you can create custom scenarios with the software. But now another common question we get is, can you create scenarios with custom images from your own mine site? And the answer is yes, you can create your own scenes from images that you capture from your own mine site. And that's relatively easy to do. So I'm just going to exit back out to the main menu here to show you how that can be done. Okay, So from the main menu, we're going to go back to Instructor Resources, and we're going to click on Manage Scenes. And right now I don't have any custom scenes here, so nothing appears in this Manage Scenes screen. So I'm going to create a new scene by clicking on Create in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm going to give this new scene a name. I'm going to call it Loaders. And then I'm going to select an image that I have saved on my hard drive. And this image is a panoramic image that I took with my smartphone at a mine in southern Utah. And I'm just going to select that image from the Windows tray, and the software is going to ask me a question here. It's going to ask me, is this a panoramic image, and how many degrees around is this image? So when I took this image on my phone using the panoramic image feature, I sort of panned around maybe a little bit more than a quarter of a turn. So I'm going to say, as sort of a guesstimate, that this image is about 100 degrees in in field of view. So maybe a little bit more of a quarter of a turn. So the image will be loaded up into the software here. And you can see this image. It came in pretty good from just a cell phone capture. You can see on both sides of the image there's some black bars. That's because this is not a full 360-degree image. It's just 100 degrees. So it's a little bit more than a quarter of a turn. And as we look through here, you could see a potential hazard over here, which are these front-end loaders. It looks like they might be heading towards each other, and they could potentially collide if they're not careful. So I want to add this as a potential hazard. So I'm going to go up to the top right-hand corner of the screen, and I'm going to click Add Hazard. And I'm going to call this hazard front-end loaders. And I'm going to enter a description for this hazard. I'm going to say that loaders should maintain communication at all times. And within this description box, you can really add any kind of description you want. It gives you the ability to add links as well. And then the program is going to ask me to mark this hazard. So I'm going to mark around the loaders. And when I do this, I'm going to pick sort of a square shape to mark this. So I'm going to pick a point to outline in the top left corner, and then I'm going to go in the bottom left corner, bottom right, top right, and sort of make a square shape. And when you're marking hazards, I really recommend that you do some sort of square shape or a triangle shape. Just don't try to do circles or other kind of crazy polygons, because sometimes the program gets a little bit confused. So once I've sort of outlined this hazard with these 4 different points, I'll click Done Marking, and it's created for me sort of a rectangle around the hazard. So that's our first hazard for this scene. And I am going to click on Save Hazard. So now, if there were another hazard in this scene, we would have the ability to add that hazard as well. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll just stick with that one hazard. I'm going to go ahead and save this scene. Okay, and now I can go ahead and quit this menu. So this is going to take me back to the Manage Scenes menu. You can see my new scene called Loaders. And then I'm going to go back. So the next thing that we want to do, if we want to use that scene that we just created, we have to create a new scenario for that scene. So I'm going to go back to Manage Scenarios. I'm going to create a new scenario. And you can see under the available scenes, we have a new custom row. And you can see my new loaders custom scene there. And you have the ability to mix and match which scenes you want in the scenario. So you can use some of the Niosh scenes that we provided with the software along with your custom scenes as well. So if you wanted to mix and match that way, you could do that as well. So I'm just going to give this scenario a name. I'll just call it stockpile area. And I'm going to go ahead and save this scenario. And then we can go ahead and run the scenario just like we did before with the other ones. We'll click on our new stockpile scenario. We'll create the session. We'll name our session Calcema 3, 25 participants, instructor led, use a 5-minute timer, start session. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start our first workplace examination using our custom scene. And just like before, we have the ability to scan around and search this scene for hazards. And we know we created a hazard here, over here by the loader, so I'm just going to go ahead and click on it and then click Done to indicate that we're done searching. And if you wanted to, you could go on and continue to search the additional scenes in the scenario, but I'm going to go ahead and debrief right now the scene that we just went over. So here we go. It says we have identified one hazard. We searched it for 18 seconds and we have 1 click. So let's take a look at this in more detail. And you can see if you click on that hazard, the information that we entered for that hazard appears at the top of the screen. And really any information that you enter in while you're creating the scene will appear there. So that gives it sort of a neat ability to customize these scenes and incorporate images from your own mine site. Okay, so I think that gives a pretty good overview of the program itself. There's one last feature that I want to show you, and that's the ability to export scenarios. This is a question that comes up pretty regularly for us, is that can these scenarios be shared from one computer to another? And the answer is yes, you can do that. And I will show you how. We'll go back to the main menu, and then we'll go to the instructor resources menu. And then we'll click on Manage Scenarios. So if I wanted to share that scenario that includes my custom scene with another instructor at my mine site or within my company, I would click on this new scenario, and then I would go down and click Export. And this will export the file as a .exa file. You just go ahead and give that a name. You could give that stockpile. You could call it stockpile scene, and then save it. It'll save it as a .exa file, and then you can go ahead and email that file to one of your colleagues somewhere else. So it gives you the ability to share that file. And then when they receive that file, they would just come back to the same menu here, and then they would click on import, and they would search for that file, and it would be available within their system browser, and they would just import that file, and it would be available for them to use within the program. So I think that really covers the main features of the software program. So I think I'll kick it back over to you, Brianna. Was there anything that I missed, or anything else that we should go over on the software program?
I don't think so. I think that was a very comprehensive overview of the software.
Okay, great. So
Yeah, I think go ahead.
I'll just send it back over to you for some closing remarks, and I'll stop
Okay,
sharing my
sure.
screen here. Yep.
Let's see. 2, 3. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So it was a very comprehensive overview. I think that both John and I, our take-home message would be that the software is actually very user-friendly. Um, it's it's um, it's very easy to use, but if you happen to get stuck, there's always a help menu, and those help menus are um, if you get stuck on the build a scenarios function and you click help, it'll take you to the build a scenarios function section of the help menu. So it's very useful, very, very user-friendly and very helpful. But what we're gonna talk about for the next few minutes is how you can potentially incorporate this and use this in your current health and safety plans. So as John wrapped up and indicated, Examiner does give you the opportunity to create custom content and materials to address specific hazards with your mine workers. So keeping that in mind, you can incorporate Examiner into your current health and safety plans by using it during Part 46 and Part 48 annual refresher training. We've observed that Examiner engages mine workers. So John mentioned this a bit as he was demonstrating. We've observed classes where groups of workers would actually just get out of their seats and approach the screen that Examiner was being projected on and would interact and describe, argue, go through the hazards that they found. So there's a lot of active participation in the workplace examination search task and also during discussions around hazards during the debrief. So you can use Examiner at the end of your refresher training as a means to put what mine workers learned into practice. So whatever it is that you covered during the day, you can then follow that up with by using Examiner and focus on those hazards that you talked about. You can even use this as a means to evaluate what your workers have learned. You can use Examiner during quarterly health and safety training to demonstrate changes at the mine site. So because you can upload your own pictures, you can do that to highlight changes in the layout of the mine. So did you change traffic patterns? Did you update the location of a dump site? Or did you perhaps change some sort of site-specific safety policy? Did you have an update to a glove policy and you really want to remind people or refresh people or reintroduce that policy to your workers? You can use Examiner to highlight those because you can include pictures with your own workers and then attach policies for that debrief. You can also incorporate Examiner into toolbox talks to highlight hazards that are related to recent incidents and injuries, and to even discuss safety concerns related to things like routine tasks. So there's a lot of ways that you can incorporate this into your current health and safety plan and program. One really interesting thing that we've observed and that we've gotten some feedback on is how useful this is as a tool with novice or new mine workers, because it really gives you the opportunity to expose workers who don't have much experience to different hazards, different places on the work site, to different locations without actually exposing them to potential risks of those jobs or those pieces of equipment or those locations. So it's really good at kind of giving your new workers, a preview of what's to come as they move to different locations at the mine site. So we've had a lot of really great feedback using Examiner this way. So overall, we think that Examiner is a benefit to the mining community. First, because of the way that it engages mine workers. So Examiner, we've seen Examiner promote active learning because it really encourages participation, both during the workplace examination search task and during the debrief. And research indicates that when learners are engaged, they're more focused on the material they're being presented and the task they are performing, which ultimately promotes higher level critical thinking. Examiner also gives the user, so the health and safety professional or the trainer, the opportunity to customize materials for classes. So this means that you can focus on hazards and risks that are critical to your workers at your work sites, and you can present them in the context of your mine site. So workers can see hazards in the place where they actually work. This create your scenes feature that John covered during the demonstration increases the usable life of the product. So this isn't one of those one and done training products. So you can start by using our materials to get comfortable with the program, to get comfortable with creating your own materials, and then you can start to do that yourself by adding your own pictures. So this really increases the lifespan and the longevity with which you can use the software program. And just to remind you where you can find this, so you can access Examiner as well as other mining products through the mining website, the Niosh mining website, and the address is listed here. So this is the cover page or a version of the cover page you'll see when you visit this site. It changes fairly regularly as we update different outputs and different products. But you'll find Examiner as well as some of the other products that I'm going to talk about in just a second by going to this videos, software, training, etc. button. You can go there. You'll find Examiner. You'll find the HazRec Challenge, which was an online product that preceded Examiner. You'll find other training materials that we have available, and you'll also find infographics. So we've made a push recently to develop infographics to address critical topics and critical areas of research that might be of interest to our stakeholders, to you all. Infographics are available as a PDF. You can print them out, you can send them to people, you can hang them on your walls, you can give them to people to discuss during toolbox talks or other training sessions. They are a really nice brief overview of critical points that we've identified in the research that we do. So we have infographics now available related to slip, trips, and falls, and this fall protection easy as 1, 2, 3. John and I were both involved in the creation of this infographic. There's 2 of them. These are related to the use and demonstrating the use for fall protection. We also have infographics related to heat stress and the risk factors associated with heat stress, as well as infographics related to sleep and fatigue. And this is just a subset of all of the infographics that we have available, and you can find them on that mining products page. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about current research that we have going on related to heat stress and the risk factors associated with heat stress, because this is one type of hazard that that you all may experience at your mine sites and with your mine workers. As it gets hotter, mine workers are exposed to changing levels of heat throughout their work days. So heat strain risk grows as we mine in hotter environments. And exposure to heat can increase injuries as a result of decreased cognitive performance. So to understand how heat strain impacts mine workers' cognitive performance, Niosh is conducting both a lab and field study to identify ways to assess and monitor miners for heat strain and to prevent adverse outcomes for heat. So the lab portion of this work is going to be conducted in our Spokane Mining Research Center in Spokane, Washington, and the field portion is going to be conducted at mine sites, hopefully across the United States. Overall, we're really interested in observing how heat strain and heat exposure changes cognitive performance. So we have some tests that we're going to have workers perform throughout the day, and then we're going to collect some information, especially while we're in the field, about what people are doing when they're exposed to higher levels of heat. So the results of these studies will be used to develop guidance and to mitigate or prevent heat strain among mine workers. And we're going to provide mining companies a report to represent their heat exposure profile, and that'll be specific for mine sites. And we're also going to give mine workers individual reports that show how their body temperatures respond while they're working in heat. And I'm telling you about this because we're in the planning phases for this work right now. And if you have any questions about this type of work, you can please feel free to reach out. On the next slide, I'm going to give you our contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions related to it. But even better than that, if you're interested in possibly working with us during this data collection, if you've noticed that heat and heat exposure has an impact on your workers, you can feel free to reach out. I can pass on additional information, direct you to the infographics, further explain the study that we're going to be doing, and answer any questions that you may have if you're interested in partnering with us to move this work forward. This wraps up what it is that John and I have planned to talk to you about today. Would like to thank CalCIMA for the opportunity to present to you all, and would also like to thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions about Examiner, any of the materials that we've included within the Examiner software, or any of the other products that are available on the Niosh website, please feel free to reach out. We have ongoing research. Our Niosh has ongoing research that touches upon just about any and every concern that you may have at your mine site. And if you can't find something on our website to address your concerns, we might be able to help you. So we're happy to answer your questions and to direct you to a researcher who may be better able to answer a question than we are. With that, I will say thank you. John, would you like to add anything?
No, I have nothing to add. Just thank you again, CalCIMA, for hosting this virtual presentation, and we hope to participate again in the future. And as Brianna mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you again.
Yep, thank you.